welcome to AI generation and game development. So you're at Swiss Game Hub. My name is David Stark, and this talk is about AI tools that have turned up in the last few years and their potential impact on game development as a kind of a type of work. So we're not talking about game AI. We're talking about using AI to make content and code and so on for games. This talk has three parts. I first want to talk a little bit about the basics of what is AI generation. How do you use it if you haven't looked into it? Then the second part is talking about the legality and ethics of using these tools, because they're quite controversial. I have opinions about this. I also haven't really made up my mind, so I'm going to try and present a whole bunch of different perspectives on it. And I'm not here to tell you, oh, you should do this. This is not a you should do this talk. This is a here's a bunch of things to think about talk. And then finally, okay, what do these tools mean for game development as a discipline? How might your work change in the next few years? How is it changing right now? On the basis of that. So again, this will be somewhat speculative, but hopefully founded in some concrete things. Okay, so what is AI? So in this particular case, we're talking about these large language models and image models that have cropped up in the last few years. They are based on using a very large amount of data and using this data to train neural networks. And what these do really is that they find patterns and correlations in this data, and they are then able to recreate things that follow the same patterns and correlations. So I want to be clear, these things don't think, they don't understand, they are not able to generally perform any kind of logical reasoning on what's there, but the sheer amount of information that they're being given, which is basically like millions upon millions of pictures, millions upon millions of words, is so big, way more than any human being could ever read or see in a single lifetime, that they can just really find a lot of these high-level patterns and correlations, and they can become extremely good, spookily good at actually creating them. So, yeah, they can't think, but in a way they are vastly more experienced, you could say, than a normal human being. And that also kind of informs what you can do with them. So, just to be clear, no, we're not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence robots in the next week. This is quite far away from that. It's arguably it's simultaneously actually better than human beings and a lot worse than human beings, because it's quite different from human beings. But that still means it has an impact, okay. So I, for this talk, spent a little bit of time looking at different tools. I've used some of them previously, but I wanted to see what the state of the art is. This was a pretty shallow look. I mean, there might be someone in the audience, who actually already knows a lot more about this than I do, and yeah, okay, for which I apologize. This is strictly amateur hour. In my defense, I have a degree in computer science. I have programmed my own neural network on the GPU before it was cool, but I'm not an expert at using these systems. And the three systems which it's worth looking at, I think, at the moment are ChatGPT, Midjourney, and GitHub Copilot. So ChatGPT is a system that basically ate a huge amount of text, and you can talk to it and have these conversations. Basically, it evolved out of the GPT series of text systems, which were less conversation-oriented, and now they really kind of put it into this format where you can have this exchange with multiple rounds, where you can ask questions, you can ask follow-up questions. And it's spookily good. I mean, you can ask it questions and it gives you pretty good answers. They've also done a lot of work probably kind of at the surface level, but they've done a lot of work to stop it from giving you wrong answers. So, like a year ago or so, you got a lot of stuff on social media where people would just trick ChatGPT into saying dangerous nonsense. And obviously this was very bad for their public relations. And so they spent a lot of time making sure it wouldn't do that anymore. So if you ask ChatGPT to make you a bomb, it will say like no. If you ask ChatGPT to give you a lovely recipe for a soup made out of poisonous plant, it will say like no, this plant is poisonous, I can't do this. If you ask ChatGPT to give you a biography of a Roman emperor that didn't exist, it will actually go no, there was no such Roman emperor. So it's gotten a lot better at saying no to your requests. But my feeling is this is probably a lot of code that's been laid on top of it, and in practice you can still get around this. You just have to become more sophisticated. So I still wouldn't really people are using ChatGPT for research a lot, which okay, but pretty please if you do that, you have to double check every single thing it says because yes.
Yeah. Just finish the sentence.
Yeah, you have to double check everything it says because of course it's read Wikipedia, of course it's read all of these things, but it didn't actually process the information in a structured way. It's just read a whole bunch of text and saw the sort of relationship between words. And so it's unlikely to put the words in the wrong order, but it still might do that. Mm-hmm.
The new system with the plugins has research plugins which are much better at actually checking research and linking you to the papers, the actual relevant papers where it got the information out of. So that works better. But it works also worse because it actually doesn't, it's much more restricted than before. If you don't do that, you get much more interesting answers. But if you use the plugins, the research AI plugins, you get the relevant papers where it got the information out of. It needs more time, so you need to wait longer because it has to look up everything.
Yeah, so this is also reaction because again, I mean, it's great that it's developed like that. It's also reaction because again, people were making fun of these systems for just inventing papers, for inventing books, and researchers would say like, I just got a request for a paper that ChatGPT claimed I wrote, and I never wrote this paper, just made it up. So they're adding systems to kind of try and fix that. But as we will also see later, the more you try to fix it up, also the more boring the results become. So in a way, the value of this as a creative system can actually get diminished. When it comes to creativity, I mean, I tried a bunch of things. I specifically tried to use it to generate ideas for my game because it was just like, okay, I know my game, new ideas for my game, whatever, let's use a real world use case. And yeah, the ideas are okay, but they're not very creative. They're the sort of ideas that someone would sort of come up with off the top of their head. It's like, it suggested, hey, you could in your steampunk game, you could have like a robot uprising. I was like, yeah, I could do that. It's also a huge trope, but I guess I could do that. But it's definitely a very useful tool. It's a definitely very useful tool, especially if you're just stuck trying to start with writing something and you wanted to give your first draft, or if you just wanted to enumerate the obvious ideas in case you missed any of them. So it's worth using. So the second one is Midjourney. So if you saw the picture which I used to advertise this talk, that was the first picture was from Google Deep Dream, which was quite a few years ago. It was sort of the first time people saw this sort of AI generated imagery, which looks super primitive to us now, but was very impressive at the time. And then you have 5 generations of ChatGPT of Midjourney, where it went from, with the same prompt, where it went from, if you squint, you can see what it was trying to do, via, but it's not very good, to, oh, wow, this is actually really good. And so, this is what I got out with this prompt, old painting of a knight sitting on a red Komodo dragon. As you can see, it got confused. That made the knight red rather than the Komodo dragon. So, okay, some points off that. But apart from that, it's actually a pretty good picture. You can quibble, like there's something a bit wrong with the feet there. And the way he's sitting is a bit off. And he has the wrong number of digits, of course, because this is AI generated and hands are hard. So I wouldn't use this as like the big hero image, but just as an illustration somewhere in the game as a minor thing. Yeah, absolutely. This is great. And despite the mistakes, if you ask someone to actually draw this for you, I mean, okay, you wouldn't make the mistakes, Annika, but how long would it take you to draw something like
I
that?
mean, if it would be a real oil painting.
Yeah, let's say you do it digitally. You don't have to use
But
oil.
still, a lot of hours. So.
Exactly, and so obviously it would be a lot of money. So you can not spend that money at the cost of, okay, slightly wrong number of fingers, but who cares? And Midjourney has made this huge development from, this is an interesting curiosity, to genuinely, okay, this is actually really good, and also this is the kind of detail that you would have to spend a lot of time or a lot of money to do.
I've actually taken shots like this and then put them into Photoshop and fix those couple of things, and it's fine.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you can also fix things up. Also, notably, this is one of the, when you do Midjourney, you gives you 4 images, and this is one of the 4 images on the first try. You can obviously also just keep on going until it happens to not make a stupid mistake. And but even in a sort of a one-shot process, this worked pretty well. And then we have GitHub Copilot. So Copilot is a plugin for your integrated development environment. It's available for Visual Studio and for various JetBrains IDEs like IntelliJ and so on. So Copilot basically ingested the entirety of GitHub and learned a lot of patterns of code from that, on top of pre-existing kind of, I think, ChatGPT information. And so what it can do is it basically works like a much more powerful autocomplete. So it can kind of guess what you want to do. So here, for example, I'm writing this tiny game in JavaScript, and I've just added a list of item types, and I'm making a game about wizards, and the wizard has a wand. And so I said, like, okay, yeah, what properties would this have? Well, it would have a color. Okay, it's red. It would have a weight, which is 1, and it would have, and then it suggests, well, it's a wand, so maybe, in a game, so maybe it has a damage stat. So that's pretty cool. You can use it. It's also really good at noticing what patterns you're using in your code file, not just what's in in GitHub, but what's in your file, and figuring out how to build on those patterns. So you can kind of, it feels like working with a junior programmer who's very attentive, very widely read, but not super duper smart. The thing is, the moment you ask it to do something complicated, it will probably mess it up. So in the same thing, I tried to get it to do collision detection, and the collision detection code it gave me looked like it should work, but actually was wrong. But that's okay, then you fix it. So it's not at the point yet where you can say, hey, please just write a program for me, but that's why they call it Copilot. It's not Pilot, it's Copilot. So much as with ChatGPT, you shouldn't trust it to get things right for you, but you can definitely use it to just sort of do a lot of legwork for you. And yeah, even just using it as a fancy autocomplete is very good for productivity. Yeah, so this is the game I made, and most of the code there was written, the code was written together with Copilot, and you have some blocks and some which you can run into. And one thing that was pretty neat was that, okay, the blue blocks are books, and when you go onto a book, you can press E to read the book, and it actually made it go and use the GPT-4 API to generate the content of the book. So when you go and read the book, it actually calls OpenAI and says, hey, please make up some stuff for the book, which it was able to do very instantly, because unsurprisingly, there's probably like 10,000 example bits of code on how to use this API in GitHub, so it was easy. So again, you can also use it to kind of look up instead of Googling it or using Stack Overflow, but much like with Stack Overflow, you still have to check whether it actually works. So nothing new there. Okay, so these are 3 examples of systems that are totally worth looking at. They are developing quite a lot. As I said, like some of the information which I said already was already slightly outdated, so there's definitely a lot of improvement happening. Okay, so we're going to get to the vending and the gnashing of the teeth part of the talk, which is the sort of legal and moral issues. So the thing is that all of these models, Midjourney, ChatGPT, and Copilot were trained by scraping vast amounts of data off the internet and basically ignoring their copyright status. So just taking all these words that were written, all of these pictures that were drawn, all of these photographs that were taken, and just running them through this process without, actually caring about the copyright status. One particularly spicy case with Copilot was that the first version of Copilot ignored the licensing on the code, and so it would sometimes reproduce GPL copyleft code verbatim, which is actually a clear violation of the license agreement. But the thing is, with everything else, it's in a gray area, because it's not copying it exactly, it's more like indexing it or processing it. And obviously some processing is okay, right? I'm allowed to tell you how many words are in a book, and that's not a copyright infringement on the book, right? I can probably give you a list of words in the book by how often they appear. It's also not a copyright infringement, right? Can I give you a list of words in the book with the index at which each of them appear? Well, the thing is that you can use this information to reproduce the book one-to-one, so arguably that's not copyright infringement, right? If I take the book and I just replace like the letter D with the letter, with like a fish emoji, then people would say, yeah, that's copyright infringement. I can't just take Harry Potter and replace the letter D with a fish emoji and go, this is a new book. So in practice, a lot of this relies on the fact that lawyers aren't computer scientists and judges aren't computer scientists. And it's still in this gray zone, like how much processing of the information, how much taking of the information and using it for something else counts as copyright infringement. I don't have a solution for this. I'm just about a computer scientist. I'm absolutely not a lawyer. But this isn't the thing where we can just say, it's really clear cut, it's the solution. It's a genuinely new use of information that probably genuinely needs a new legal framework. And so the one thing I would say for certain is that if you have someone who says, no, it's obviously this, they're trying to tell you something because they want it to be one way or the other, and it's not settled. And then we have the moral arguments.
Can I have one more about the legality?
Yes, of course.
One of the things you have to remember is if you use pictures made or images made by any of these automated systems, you have no copyright on them. So anybody can take them, and you have no way whatsoever in Switzerland to get legal anything. So if you use them, or if you use models without having any artistic input into them, they are trivial, and as trivial, they are not yours. So they can be they found of somebody in whatever country they want and they can make their own game with your assets and you have no legal rights on them. So just keep that in mind. So I would say use it for concept art, but probably not use it in your game.
Thank you. I didn't know that. That's really useful information.
That's by the way, that's information specifically. I asked this a lawyer we had at HSLU who had this workshop on legal issues on pictures. So he said in Switzerland, everything that comes out of a machine and has no artistic input from anybody is not protected. So if you take it and put it in Photoshop and make it right, you probably have more legal things. So I would say rather take a bad Midjourney picture, put it into Photoshop, ask somebody to fix it for you, then you probably have copyright on it.
What is like artistic input?
I have
can
asked.
you flip the horizontal and
You
I
change
have
one
asked,
pixel.
no, that
mirror it
wouldn't
or something?
work. I asked if I put my signature into it, if it would work. No, that's not. It has to be a significant change. But also, important in Switzerland, this is somehow decided in a court, in very small courts that have, by people that have no idea about artistry or artistic visions or anything like that. So it will be tried probably where you live in a court of people who have no idea what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's also in like a general, if you have like an indie game that is getting big, we saw it with Straightform. you can't really like, people will, especially like in the Asian countries, they will just take your stuff and you can't really do something.
You can't really do something, but you have legal rights. Here you don't have legal rights, so you can't even, there is no way you can.
Yeah. So for context, Straightform made The Wandering Village, right? And they discovered that a Chinese studio who was also making like a mobile city builder just sort of put sort of their concept of like being on this big animal into their game in a way that looks extremely similar to Wandering Village. But in practice, trying to catch them and trying to punish them or something for this was just, it's not going to work. It's not worth the effort. So, that's why, the legality thing is a very interesting question, but it's of course also not everything. There's practical issues and so there's moral arguments. So arguably the thing is that you're taking, art and photography made, that I'm just going to talk about pictures a bit, but it also applies to writing and code. You take works that people have created, and you're using this as raw material for this system that you can then use, that you don't need them anymore, and that you don't have to pay them, which sounds kind of unfair. You can counter by saying, well, the thing is that, of course, if I'm an artist, also look at other people's art and learn from it. All art is kind of inspired and remixed from existing stuff. So why is this different? And you can say, well, it's different because it's a computer, but okay, then we have to establish that matters. You also have to point out that the remix culture used to be a bigger thing. You used to be able to, for example, sample all the songs for your music, and that's just been killed off by corporations who were really into maximal amount of copyright right until now, where all of a sudden they feel like copyright isn't that important because now they found an exciting way to make money by ignoring copyright. Also, as I said, it's using people's work as raw material to not pay them. I feel this is a little bit like, for example, Uber. The thing with Uber is not that the innovation with Uber wasn't the app. The innovation with Uber was taking taxi drivers and turning them into independent contractors with worse working conditions. And a lot of the time, so sort of disruptive innovation really means trying to get around existing regulations. A lot of financial innovations are just like, that you're just trying to get around existing laws which were put there for a reason. So yeah, I have a lot of moral problems with this, but practically speaking, well, you can't, just because you're wagging your finger doesn't mean that changes anything, and you have to consider for yourself what this brave new world of AI tools means. What is your, apart from the legal issue, where is your moral stance, and how much moral stance can you afford?
I have also a further moral argument, which I think is considered much less, is for these systems to work, there is a lot of very underpaid work done. So ChatGPT has filters, they have testers, they have people looking at the texts, collecting the text. It's even worse with the pictures, because the pictures normally somebody has to check if the descriptions of the pictures are right, if the description has to put descriptions to the pictures, put the whole framework behind it. Then there is people testing that stuff until it works. ChatGPT has around three tiers of filters which have to be checked by people, and this is mostly work done by underpaid people in third world countries. So that is also, for us it's easy to use, but there is quite a lot of work going into there until this stuff works, because somebody has to index it, somebody has to check it, somebody has to check the filters, somebody has to check if it really works, and so on and so on and so on. And I would like to put that into the moral argument too.
Exactly, thank you. And going fully political here, there's currently a lot of money being put into these AI startups and so on by people with a lot of money. And the thing is, the people with a lot of money, you don't really see anyone trying to make robots that flip burgers at McDonald's, because that's not necessary. There's a lot of poor people. They're interchangeable. You can just hire a new person. What's not interchangeable yet is professionals, doctors, artists, lawyers, etc., etc. And this is what this is about. This is an attempt by the people all the way at the top with the money and the power to finally replace professionals, because they don't like professionals. It annoys them that there's these people who have skills that make them non-interchangeable. That means that they have some leverage against them. And so if they could somehow replace a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, and so on with a large heap of underpaid people in third world countries and a bunch of AI stuff, they would be so happy. And that's also why they've put a lot of money into this. I don't think it's actually going to work, but they certainly would like it to work.
What do you think then?
What I think?
Why? Why do you think?
I think that in the end, let's say, for example, you try to make an AI system that reads legal documents. It will get it mostly right, but especially when it comes to law, you have to be 100% right. When it comes to equally to programming, again, you can make code that looks like it works, but then it actually doesn't work, or it has security holes in it, or whatever. And so you can't quite replace actually understanding the thing you're working on. You can't just replace understanding with a huge amount of statistical information about what it looks like, which is ultimately all this is. But the people with money also want to believe that understanding doesn't exist. They want to believe that professional knowledge doesn't exist, because again, it annoys them that there's anything out there that's not money that's important.
I am not 100% with your standpoint on that, but I want to just say that there was once a time when Microsoft tried to have their coding, the development teams, let's say it like this, the development teams split into people who know what they're doing and code monkeys who just do what they are told. They had to, that was late 80s, 90s, something like this. It didn't work because coders normally want to think, and they are not really interested in just doing stupid code. just typing in stupid code without thinking and letting, like, you do that and you don't think about anything at all. People don't want to be code monkeys. For me, what Copilot reminds me of is the code monkeys.
Yes.
It's not a bad thing if it's going to be for everybody. It's a bad thing if it's going to be behind the paywall. That's nobody can.
And yeah,
go
I would
behind.
absolutely, and I would say that when I say it won't work, what I mean is it won't work 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, it will and can be used to squeeze existing professionals out and try to make this professional class smaller because that's what they want, but it's not going to eliminate it.
And that's what I wanted to say too, that I also don't think that it will replace like artists, right, but it will, like, you just need then one guy that fixes the artwork, and you don't have to need like a lot of artists that doing it. You just need like one person, and that person will fix it. And we know that people with like power and money, if they can like get more power and more money, they will do that.
Yeah.
I would also argue it's also a good thing for beginners. For example, I just recently started to do a new web development project into Flask, and I, prior to that, never had touched this kind of code. And I also tried it with ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot, and for me it was like a huge helper for all those things that I never had to do before. And I think, especially for beginners, it's not just for professionals, it's also really good for beginners to just learn about code, because it's also a good mentor that isn't always right, but shockingly a lot right, especially for beginner things.
Yeah, and one of the things that developers tend to be terrible at is writing documentation. And so in a sense, we're getting around the fact that reading documentation is horrible because it's wrong and it's outdated, it's not there and whatever, because instead we can ask Copilot or ChatGPT to work from examples, which, yeah, is a lot better than trying to find the up-to-date documentation for whatever you're trying to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I try to not learn Swift by using, but I want an iOS app. So I'm using ChatGPT to not learn Swift. Because it can do that for me, I can tell it what to do.
Yeah.
For them, it's really good. Yeah, it works. It actually works. It's not something complicated I want to do, and I know enough about coding that I can understand what it's doing. But I don't really care to learn all the syntax stuff and all the library stuff. Apple wants me to learn to use that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the way it works, because if there's a syntax or a library problem, compiling it or running it will tell you. And if there's a logic problem, well, you can probably still read it well enough that you can tell, okay, this is wrong. Yeah.
So siren song of that stuff.
So yeah, talking about the future, which we're already doing. So looking at the large, long-term thing. So traditionally, AI goes in what's called summer-winter cycles. So every 20 years or so, someone comes up with a really cool new AI technique, and that unlocks a whole bunch of new applications for AI. And then at the start, people are super duper excited and they're like, oh wow, this is amazing. And some overly excited people are like, yeah, we're going to have human level intelligence in 5 years, And the people get used to it, and the limitations of this approach start becoming apparent. And then after a decade or so, we've sort of figured out what we can do with it. And people get jaded and they stop calling this stuff AI, and they're just like, yeah, it's an expert system, it's a machine learning system, whatever. And it does get used and it is useful, but the money stops flowing and we enter AI winter, and then you have another 20 years of there being no funding for any of this research and just a few hibernating AI researchers going,
And the meetups get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Exactly. So right now we're in an AI summer, which started, 5 years ago, something like that. Arguably it started with convolutional neural networks. Like that paper's from like 15 years ago or something. It takes a while to percolate.
I would say it started when TensorFlow got, when Google more or less published TensorFlow as a tool that everybody can use.
Yeah.
Then it got a hype again because everybody had a tool and the Google libraries in the back. Because the problem was always, for machine learning, the problem was always data.
Mm-hmm.
And Google, with TensorFlow, gave you, and databases it made available, gave you a vast amount of data you could use. And that jump started a lot.
Yeah, so at the moment, the magic dust is very large neural networks, very deep neural networks with a huge amount of training data compared to neural networks that, like, those have been around for decades, but before this, they were like tiny and had tiny amounts of training data. But the question is sort of, where are we in the cycle? I honestly don't know. Maybe we will get to human level intelligence. I don't think so. Well, I genuinely don't know where we are in the cycle. Maybe we're still kind of in the beginning, and this stuff is going to keep on, just in the last year, something like Midjourney became enormously better, and maybe it will become enormously better again and again for another 5 years. And then I don't really know where we'll end up exactly, because maybe you can't just say, hey, please design an entire world for me, and we're just like, okay, here's all the stuff. There are some indications that investors, well, they're investors, but whatever, they're starting to cool on AI, they're starting to think there's a bubble, they're starting to short AI companies. So maybe we're starting to get into AI autumn, but this is investors, we're not, doesn't mean all that much. And the thing is, in practice, what we've got right now, even if Midjourney does a blog post and says, hey guys, we really tried and we just can't make it any better, this is as good as it will get, it still changes a lot. Even if all research stopped tomorrow, it still changes a lot. So yeah, so going back slightly about my experience with not using Midjourney, I'm working on the DLC for my game, and in this game, you have a whole bunch of hero characters, and so obviously these hero characters need portraits of these pictures of these different steampunk guys with funny hats and so on. And I started working on this 6 months ago, and I was like, hey, maybe I could use Midjourney to, or some other system, to make the portraits. And I tried it, and it wasn't quite good enough. There were pictures, there were faces, but there were still some weird mistakes, like it gets confused about glasses, ears were weirdly shiny and in slightly the wrong place, lips got a bit mangled, and so it wasn't quite there. So it's like, okay, yeah, fair enough. I am going to hire an artist to do this for me, and I hired the artist, and he did great work, and this cost me like $5,000. Now it's good enough, right? So if I just waited 6 months, I could have just saved myself these $5,000. I know, and not have any copyright on any of the images and so on, and the moral issues, etc. But from a purely, I'm just a professional game developer now, want to make money with games point of view, I could have saved myself a whole bunch of money. But so the thing is with Midjourney, I talk about Midjourney because I was trying out a bunch of different tools, and right now I would say Midjourney is way better than anything else you can easily get. Of course, you can build your own thing and so on, and but if you just want something that works, where you can just type in a prompt, Midjourney is way better than like Stable Diffusion or whatever. So I'm sticking with that. So yeah, it's interesting because there's some things you can't do. So here's an example. So again, here the prompt is oil painting of a heavily scarred Pakistani aristocrat, portrait close up. The funny thing there is they're on the 16:9 aspect ratio. And these are really good pictures. I mean, come on, look at this. Look at the detail there. Look at this falls. Look at all of that. This would take a lot of time to paint, right? I mean, this is really good. None of them have any scars in the slightest. I said heavily scarred. I really tried to make it do the scarring because that was my idea for the character. I wanted this sort of aristocratic, slightly dark-skinned, man with a heavy scarring, and it was just like, no, No, we can't do that. Does he not know what scars are? No, my assumption is Midjourney used to make all these mistakes with faces. And so they put a lot of work into really training it to not make mistakes with faces, not to have weird structures on it, weird asymmetries, weird marks or whatever. And as a side effect of that, it now refuses to do scars because scars are atypical, asymmetrical, etc., etc. So here it's just like, yeah, you can do anything as long as you don't want the scars character.
How much data do you think is there on face scarring?
It used to be able to do it, is the thing.
Oh, really?
So if you go back like 2 generations, I could ask you for a scarred character and it would do it. And the picture on the whole wouldn't be good enough to use, but they had a scar. And then I think I even tried it like with 1 generation later, and the scars had become very superficial, and now it refuses to do it at all. So yeah, this is a bit similar to the thing you mentioned, where yeah, it's getting better, but it's also losing some creativity because they're trying to optimize it for the correct case, and sometimes you don't really want correct, you want interesting.
Or maybe it's another thing because you can split quite easily also in the data what they do. What I think they would also do, but I think because there's no scars, I'm not sure how much gore they actually can produce in these images, that they completely filter it out to not allow to do certain things. I haven't used Midjourney so far, but usually like in a model you can really try to isolate things, but still allow it. But I think now, especially Google can do that easily. That's why I'm at the moment more thinking about if they're simply not allowing scars.
Maybe.
Sure.
I mean, there's also some problems it will just refuse to do, of course. If you say like sexy lady boobies, it will just be like, no, go somewhere else. But yeah, it's possible that they also have a softer system to try and eliminate some things.
But it also makes sense maybe it's both, because another thing like to isolate things is also possible. And especially
Yes.
Google had quite advances to that. That's why it was surprising them.
Yeah.
Because they know they had the initial point there.
Yeah.
What about those tools that do like a second layer? You give the picture, the Photoshop thing, where you just say, okay, I want palm tree here, and it puts a palm tree there.
So yeah, what you're referring to, just for general audience, is called in-painting and out-painting. So in-painting is, hey, please put a thing in there. Out-painting is, hey, please extend the picture. So I tried a bunch of in-painting and out-painting tools, and at least if you just sort of use them trivially, they're not that good. Like in terms of the quality of stuff generated, Midjourney is way ahead of what it makes. So there's now an in-painting, out-painting tool in the preview version of Photoshop, and it's like where Midjourney was like 8 months ago. So it's, but again, maybe they will fix it up.
Is it Genfill? It's called the Photoshop?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Because take a square and then right with the prompt.
Yeah, exactly. So you can just say, please put this in here.
Yeah.
So again, this might improve and we might get there. Right now, we have this sort of issue. So yeah, maybe you could select an area and say, okay, will you put the scar there, please? And I also think that arguably these more interactive systems are really interesting, because like with Copilot, it's an interactive system. You don't just say, please write me a game. It's please, you have this conversation with it, or with ChatGPT, with images, with stuff like, infill and outfill and so on. We're starting to get there, but we're not as far yet there. Or the tools exist, but they don't work so well, or they need a bit more setup than just something you can download. The other example I wanted to mention was, this is me asking for a oil painting of horse artillery. So again, I was thinking, okay, could I use this to make stuff for my game? What I actually wanted was artillery that was being pulled by some large lizards. There's no horses in my game, there's lizards. But it completely messed that up. So I was like, okay, please draw me some horse artillery. And it was like, okay, this isn't horse artillery. For reference, this is horse artillery. So the thing is, it's a very specific historical term for a type of light artillery that was moved around on the battlefield and between battlefields and so on by a team of horses. And it looks like this. It's actually really, it always looks pretty much exactly like this. There's not even that much variation visually. And it just didn't do that. And the problem is just that it didn't know what it was. The information wasn't in its tag data set.
Probably people who took photos like the one you showed before, didn't know that it was horse artillery and called horse artillery,
Exactly.
which is the
So
the
the
journey can
poor,
only do stuff people know how to tag.
the poor person
well,
in
there's
like.
a cannon and there's wagon.
Yeah, there's a bit of cannoniness going on there. So it knows horse and it knows artillery, but it doesn't know horse artillery. So yeah, the poor person in like Kuala Lumpur who was tagging this stuff, of course, isn't into military history. So one more awkward thing which I actually didn't put on there was again for creating pictures of characters, I asked for a picture of a slave trader. And what was interesting was that all the generated images were of black people. Because it's not super good, I think, at understanding when something's a compound noun, at understanding that slave trader is one word and not two words. And so I was treating them individually. And then, of course, in its data set, slaves are black and traders wear suits. And so it gave me a lot of black people in suits, which isn't what I wanted, and if you Google for that term, that's not what you get either. So yeah, my point here is that you can do a lot, but there are some limits to creativity that are based on how the model is created. So sometimes the model has certain limitations for practical reasons, for legal reasons, for whatever. Sometimes it has certain limitations just because the world is vast and complicated, and if people don't know what horse artillery is, they don't add it as a tag. And it's okay, because you can work around it. So I just changed my plans. Okay, this guy doesn't have scars now. That's okay, but and yes, this is like a subtle worry. That's the obvious worry. My subtle worry is it will limit your creativity because you'll just change your plans and your designs to be able to use these tools because they're so useful, and so you're going to make something where you can use the tools and not make something where the tools get a bit confused.
Can I say there's one thing, there is now starting to be models where you can actually feed your own pictures in, and they will try to work on these pictures. They don't work very well. I tried some of them. I don't know if I tried the right ones or the wrong ones, where you can feed it 5 pictures and it should do your new pictures should be based on the ones you feed it. It's not working very well at the moment, but there will be probably in the near future a time when you can actually feed it your own picture and tell it, hey, make me a picture based on this.
Yeah, then we're starting to talk much more about using it as a tool, using it much like at the low end, Copilot is fancy autocomplete. Image generators can become kind of a fancy brush in Photoshop, right? You're using it to say, I need some fur here, and use a fur brush, and it's like, okay, I need a horse here, and it's basically a horse brush. You will put the horse in there and set up the lighting and perspective correctly. So I think right now this is a worry, and I think it continues to be a worry because ultimately, it all depends on what gets put into these models, which also means that maybe you do want to have some weird stuff going on that's slightly edgy, and the model is just like, no. So it's something to be aware of, maybe a little thing to notice if you're changing your plans based on what your tools can do, rather than figuring out how to do it. Yeah.
In my experience, it seems to be rather bad at attributing like adjectives to the right object. In the sentence.
Like the red dragon, which instead it's the knight. Yeah.
So it doesn't understand the language as the commas and whatever you use to try to make it.
Absolutely, it doesn't really, Well, it's funny because we spent decades trying to make language parsers that actually did structural parsing of language. It never quite worked because language is actually a bit too flexible for that. But as far as I know, these systems don't use language parsers. They probably use something more sophisticated than just putting the words into a bag with no random order. But still, yeah, the moment you have multiple entities with multiple properties that are in some relation to each other, if you just do one prompt, it tends to mess it up. But again, that's where potentially these interactive tools can help. Okay, draw me the lizard first. Okay, I've got the lizard, now draw the knight on top of it. So
I think that it will be probably just a question of time until, for instance, OpenAI puts ChatGPT into DALL-E and you have something that really can read a prompt as a text, interpret it where it should go, and then put it into DALL-E, for instance.
Yeah.
And get a picture out.
That's interesting. Yeah, you can have a conversation which results in a picture. You have like an artist, but the artist won't actually kill you if you ask them to just make one last small change for the 100th time.
So you'll probably ask ChatGPT to convey your prompt to DALL-E. DALL-E will make you a picture, and you will convey to ChatGPT what you would like to have changed in that picture.
Yes.
Maybe to extend that, the first part of the model usually is actually a language model. Like there's a neural network that takes your sentence, and then this data gets. So actually, this already happens, so to say, not this model, but that's actually the process that it's going through. Another thing is it's always like this prompt engineering thing, because if you want to have a red dragon, I never used Midjourney, but in my studies we have looked a lot of models, and then you first have a little bit to learn how to when you want something, how to do that the model understands. If you want to have a red dragon, maybe you need that to make sure this is the red dragon, and make that like you can have there's different signs you can put that it understands this is the thing I want, and this thing should be then in relation to that or on top, or like this thing is maybe, for example, there's commas in other models, so you can put commas, and then it understands quite well. So I can make pictures exactly the way with composition. It works today quite good.
Yeah, I mean the thing with Midjourney is that it's very it's huge, right? It's very wide. It also right now I think produces the best images. So it's a bit weird. It's actually a non-professional tool that doesn't necessarily give you quite a lot of fine control, but it also just draws better right now than other tools, and that will probably change again.
Did you use DALL-E? Or what did you use?
They're not like specific tools.
Okay.
Like like Carol's, like in DALL-E especially, we build our own models, and there we learn how to do that. Obviously, other tracks, Stable Diffusion, things like that. And the other thing, what I want to say is like that's what I was saying. Like this is like also Stable Diffusion is a very crazy wide model, and a lot of people like focus on those very mad models, but they are very narrow models that work for 10, 20 years already, that are extremely good. For example, also in our stories we have like recognition of text, handwriting. That's today, that's widely used, and it does it perfectly, almost perfectly. You just get checked and be a banana model, and this is almost spotless. This just works. And also like image, for example, we had that's already used now, where they do like trash sorting with image processing. There's also voice, for example, voice recognition. For example, is Alexa, for example, pretty sure they use models like that. It doesn't understand you always, but there are actually a lot of neural networks out there, but they are specialized. And for me, the big step now was that there was this general model, and this obviously needs crazy a lot of data, because you try to do faces, but you also can do cars and spaceships and everything. That's crazy, like how good it is for that. It's so big. But you can have a model that's just for faces. And obviously, this is much more easier and much more better, because there are models that can make perfect bust of you, perfect face with correct fingers. It's not a big an issue, but this model is just for that, because all its strength is for this purpose.
Yeah, one of the things you do if you start using the models in a more sophisticated way is that you use a general model to generate a picture overall, and then you, for example, for faces, you have models where you can then run it back over and say, okay, now please make the face work correctly. And I think, for example, Midjourney has those built in now. It just goes, oh, that's a face. Okay, let's run the face fixing model on top of it, which probably is what removes the scars, actually. Probably generates a guy with a scar, and then it's like, oh, that's a face, we should fix it out.
That's something I want to say. So, for someone like me that really cares like about social issues, I see like limits of creativity. Yes, it's like a limit of creativity, but it's also limits to diversity because we know it's like it's based on what is already out there, like you said, and what it's out there. It's just like it's a bubble of information that it's specifically around one person, we can say, or one type of person. And I think like that's like one of the big problems that we see, that the data gap between like minority groups and marginalized groups is like it's just too big. And I think especially because when you showed the one with that it doesn't generate scars, it's like okay.
Yeah, and in fact, the exact reason why I want scarred characters in there, because I have scarred characters in there, and they're also not all villains, is to push
like,
against this
did you
idea.
try it with evil character, maybe then it's
Maybe if it's just like he's so bad and so evil, just like because it's one of these aspects of diversity that the scarred character is always the evil one. So I wanted to push against that a bit. The other one is, and I think this one's, again, I think you can go back and forth on it. It's not clear if this will happen. Is this going to cause a problem long term in terms of skills? If you right now you have this career as an artist or as a writer or as a programmer or something, and you start doing fairly simple stuff, and then you graduate to more complex stuff where you have more input as well, more creativity, more kind of high level work and so on. So you go from, let's just fix this small thing, to architecting entire bits of software or doing the visual design for something. And arguably you will still need those people, even with very fancy AI. Someone still has to come up with the overall visual design. Someone has to tell the AI what to generate. And can you still get those people, these senior people, if there's no junior jobs left, if there's just this huge gap where, no, I'm sorry, we don't need anyone who can kind of draw, because we've got an AI that can kind of draw. We don't need any junior writers because we've got ChatGPT. We don't need any junior coders. We just need people who are top of the line, otherwise we don't care. And then those top of the line people retire, and then all of a sudden we have no one who has any skills left. I don't know if that's true, because on the other hand, you can say it will just change what the skills are, right? Because you still need skill to use Copilot well, you still need skill to use more sophisticated AI tools. And there it's just hard to tell. Will you lose something if if you don't do the work yourself? You can say, well, you just really have to, draw things yourself with your own hand to really understand art. But maybe that's a weird elitist viewpoint, and it actually doesn't matter. And you can also just type prompts into Midjourney with your own two hands and understand art like that. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I think, again, this is why it's a subtle trap. It's unfortunately something that maybe will happen, but if it does happen, we won't find out for another 20 years. Good luck.
Maybe the human beings' culture will going back because of this circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's another thing, right? In a way, now that we fed all of our culture into these systems, are we going to be stuck? Are we going to be culturally stuck in roughly 2020 because all of our generative models are using 2020 as a reference point and are now already, content like on the web that's made by AI stuff is starting to just drown out human-made content. If you Google for anything, it will just give you 100 SEO articles written by AIs to try to make you buy stuff. And if you feed that stuff back into the models, you will, if you have any sort of system like that, and you just feed its output back into its input, it will start doing weird and funny things like a JPEG, which you keep on recompressing. So maybe our culture will become really weird in a few decades because it's all now based on sort of a feedback loop in AIs. Don't know. Maybe people abandon this stuff again because it will get too weird. Arguably Google search is now completely broken because you Google for anything and it will just give you AI generated nonsense. So maybe people, I was thinking the other day, maybe people, it used to be, you wanted to buy, I don't know, as an example, someone said like, you want to buy a space heater, and you're like, okay, what kind of space heater is good? And you used to be able to Google for space heaters and sort of compare a bit. Now, if you do that, you get like 500 pages of spaceheaters.com with like articles about space heaters written by AIs and full of like Alibaba links and so on. So it's all nonsense. And so maybe you actually go back to the hardware store and you ask a real flesh human being who you can like touch and make sure that it's not a robot and say, okay, you're real. Okay, now tell me about space heaters, So maybe we'll kind of go back to that, because the internet will just turn into this huge whirlpool of lies and made up stuff. Not because we couldn't make it tell the truth, but because the people who are using this system don't want the truth. They want lies to make us buy stuff. And so maybe we'll just abandon the internet and be like, well, it's just full of lies. Let's talk to human beings. Which is a weird thing to think about. Anyway, so my guess is what's going to happen is, there's already right now a huge advantage to using AI. I think there's a competitive advantage using AI for doing sort of low-level work, for just like, I need a picture for this, please give me 50 pictures of swords, please give me a 3D model of a rock or something, or, please write me, an email, please write me some marketing copy, whatever. For this, it's already super good, and it's gonna be kind of destructive to labor markets. And so I think if what I called mass market games, what I mean is, garbage on your phone, is gonna basically is 100% AI stuff, because of course they're already using super cheap labor from the cheapest place they can get, and they're not exactly interested in creativity. They're just going to reskin another gacha game to be about squirrels or something. And so, of course they're going to use that because it's cheaper. With everything else, I think there will be a mixture of AI and non-AI. I think people will have different approaches just from their emotional needs and also from what's practical. I think a lot of sort of less important assets, when it comes to assets, will be AI generated, because, okay, did you really need someone to draw that rock? Probably not. And of course, things like Copilot will become kind of ubiquitous, and it will be hard to track, is this code 100% human written? Who knows? Who cares? People also attempt to differentiate. I think we'll pretty soon start getting games where they're like, this is all human made, there's no AI stuff, you get the real thing. It's not clear whether anyone will care. Maybe they will. And okay, but putting this in another way, this means, okay, long term, the visual quality of games will probably increase, because now you can just produce a lot of pretty good assets, maybe even eventually very good assets. And so, arguably the days of sort of using hand-drawn or sort of not quite fitting stuff you downloaded from somewhere for like your small indie game or whatever are over, because you can just get an AI to do that stuff for you. So the visual quality will go up. Creativity, as I argued before, I think will go down, because people will adjust to what's feasible with these systems. And yes, of course, there will be sophisticated systems that allow you to express your creativity, but then these systems probably take more skill. And so what does that mean? Oh, well, okay, rich people will get richer because, the labor costs will go down. Amazing. So, okay, what's exactly different? That people have been complaining since at least the 90s that games keep on looking better, but they're really uncreative and samey, and some people get really rich from games. So we've heard this one before. So maybe from a really zoomed out perspective, it's just going to continue a process that's already there. But of course, you are not the world economy. You are individual human beings and game developers, and so you are still going to have to figure out what you're going to do about this, where you stand from a practical, from a legal, and from a moral point of view about using these systems. And here are absolutely reviews to tell you what to do. I try to give you an overview of, some of the things to consider. Because honestly, I also don't know. When I make another DLC, do I want to spend $5,000 on assets, or do I just want to not do that? It's really tempting, but on the other hand, it's also kind of. So I don't know. I'm not here to tell you, but I hope you found the review interesting. Okay. Thank you. You can now once again open beer cans, and we can continue talking about this or about whatever else.
By the way, yes. Thank you.